Alright, what's up you guys? This is Devin with Century FX Studios, back with another video, and today we're going to be talking about one specific spec from the Eos-r, the new monster that Canon is bragging about. They say it's coming out soon. You know, the coronavirus probably has it on standstill right now, but let's talk about the processor and the megapixels. Now, for whatever reason, well, I guess I kind of know the reason, but Canon is not really talking about the megapixels. Why? Because this is a video world now. It's all about the video. And so since Canon's not talking about the megapixels in the beginning, that really means they're not focusing on the photography aspect. And this is for good reason, because the photography aspect is not really what makes cameras purchasable today. Because back in the day, they used to tout, oh, megapixels, 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 and the processor and how many frames per second can you shoot. But with this new camera, they're talking so much about, you know, bit rate, log, raw, 8K, 4K 120, and 4K 120 at 24, you know, 30, and all those other frame rates and stuff like that. It's all video centric. Whether you can get a clean HDMI, all this other stuff. And so, with that being said, it tells you which direction Canon is trying to go to with this camera. But today we're just talking about the processor, and we don't have specific specs on the processor. We just know Canon is calling it new and improved. Well, what does that mean? Well, I don't necessarily know what it means, but in my brain, I know how camera companies work. And to understand what's coming down in the next cameras, you have to understand what has come before that camera. Specifically, the 1DX Mark III, Canon's new flagship that just came out recently. It's hard to believe that they won't come out with some similar specs, on almost exactly the same specs except megapixels, to this new Eos-r. Now let's talk about the specs from the 1DX Mark III so we can get an idea of what to expect with this Eos-r, since it's supposed to be so legendary. You got an ISO range on the 1DX Mark III of 50 to 8,019-200. You know, so that's pretty high. That's close to 1 million now. Nikon already went to 1 million. So the ISO value of 1 million, that stop, it's not necessarily new. It's not necessarily impressive. I'm pretty sure they just kind of gave up on advertising via the ISO specs. So Canon has stopped raising their ISO so high because they know that people understand that ISO is not necessarily going to make my image look better. It's just kind of a barometer thing. They used to sell you on the numbers. Like 1 billion ISO with all this other stuff back in the day. They used to tell you that the ISO numbers would go so high. I mean, on a 5D Mark II, it only really goes up to 12,800. But now, you know, you got ISOs of all the way up to 800,000. So it's kind of like, oh, okay, what is this supposed to mean now? Because you know, if you raise the ISO, you're going to get noise regardless. It's all about the ISOs at lower values. You know, your 1600, your 3200, your 6400, your 12,800. You know, because the higher the ISO goes, the less the camera is going to be able to resolve a good image. So you think that if the ISO range is higher, that you can do more, and that's what they've been selling that on. But now it just seems like it's just a regular old spec that nobody really cares about. Now, when it comes to the autofocus point system, you got a 190 watt autofocus point system in the 1DX Mark III. It's understandable that this would be brought into the Eos-r. Now, this is the mechanical shutter of the 1DX Mark III, but I think they got like a 3,000 autofocus point system when you go to electronic shutter. I'm not sure. I really need to read into specs because they don't specify all of these different shutters or sensors that they're using. You know, all this stuff gets a little bit confusing because now they're separating the mirrorless electronic shutter from the mechanical shutter, and the electronic system from the mechanical system. Because if you're using the mechanical system, you can only do but so much, that I've known, because you got the mechanical system with all DSLRs. DSLRs don't have a fully electronic system, but it seems as though when you got this digital, I believe, phase detection kind of interface where you can actually, you know, drag the whole focus point all the way across the screen and use like 90% of the screen instead of the just the center of the frame for the DSLR, it becomes a different type of focusing system. So I'm going to have to do a little bit more research, and they're going to have to be a little bit more descriptive of what we're going to get as far as these focus points, because focus points are probably the most indescriptive things or non-descriptive things that you could find on camera specs, because they always try to bloat the numbers but never tell you exactly what you're getting, and that's kind of like a little ploy to get you to buy the camera. Like ISO values, they don't tell you that ISO 800,000 is probably going to be unusual. You're probably never going to find, it's probably never going to happen, and auto ISO is probably not going to put it at 8,000 ever, but nevertheless you have that at your disposal. You see what I'm saying? So they don't ever tell you the little caveats that it's probably not recommended to go that far. Now in the camera, they'll try to, like, this is high 2, this is high 3, so you know that you're reaching the extent, but they never advertise it to you before you get the camera. So you have to know, especially if this is your first camera, that high ISOs is not something that you're going to use, even though they advertise it as the biggest thing on the camera. Well, back in the day they did. Now, the only other thing I want to talk about today is the processor. Now, usually the 1DX usually has two processors or dual processor system to truck all of those files per second, especially raw files per second. And this is just for photography. This processor is supposed to be able to do 8K. This processor on the Eos-r5 is supposed to do 8K. It's supposed to be able to do all these 12 frames per second and 20 frames per second electronic. And it seems as though, based off of what Jared Polin was doing in his 1DX Mark III video, that the technology is there on Canon's side. I was very, very impressed with the 1DX Mark III when I saw it. I wasn't really impressed with the 1DX Mark II. I assumed that, you know, the camera was going to do what it did, but the 1DX Mark III really impressed me against the Sony A9. You really need to see that Jared Polin video if you haven't seen it. I'm probably going to put a link in the description below. If I don't forget, just remind me in the comments section. But the Digic X processor is what the 1DX Mark III has. I don't know if that means Digic 10 or Digic X. I think it just means Digic X, but usually those Roman numerals actually correspond to a number. They just said call it Digic X, I think. But anyway, this processor is supposed to be so good that it's supposed to be able to truck 5K RAW to the 1DX Mark III sensor. You see what I'm saying? 5K RAW is good, but 8K is another level. 8K RAW is definitely another level. And then on top of that, you got 4K at 120. That's another level. Again, another thing you want to watch out with these processors. Processors are the main things that create the heat inside of the camera. The CPU, the central processing unit, is what's going to carry all the weight, all the work. And so, is this camera going to have a fan on it? It's going to get hot? For example, if I were to set my camera to 8K and for some miracle I had some kind of SSD or hard drive that could hack 8K over 4 hours or 2 hours or 3 hours, would my camera overheat? If I had it out in the sun and with 80-degree weather and I was filming a football game, basketball game, whatever, or not basketball is indoors, but football game, soccer game, lacrosse game, whatever I'm filming, would that camera then heat up? If I put my hands on it and cover up, you know, and put more heat to that black body, because you know it's going to be black, would it heat up? Notice that the 70-200 lenses are white, and Canon claims that they have these cameras or these lenses white because they don't want it to heat up on the sidelines of a sports game. Well, what about the camera? So, I mean, I'm not saying make my Canon EOS R5 white, you know. I am saying that what have we done to circumvent the heat issues that Sony definitely had when they first came out with mirrorless cameras. Now, when Canon doubles down on specs, that means, in my opinion, based off of Canon's track record and their manufacturing abilities and their tight, stringent ideals about what should be done, it leads me to believe that Canon really wants to impress us. Canon really wants us to see what they have in store. Chelsea Northrop, Tony Northrop's wife, had said that Canon's a sleeper, and I agree with that. We've been waiting a long time for them to really impress us, and now it seems too good to be true. And if everything is generally solid, like I'm talking about like 4.5 stars out of 5 on Amazon, kind of like tight to what they said it was going to be, this is going to be a game changer. But you can't think that I'm not skeptical of some of these specs, especially since they're not really talking about the photography aspects of this camera all that much. They're talking about all video, and video is very, very taxing on any camera, let alone a mirrorless camera that serves everything to you digitally. That means more processing time and more error margin for the camera. I'm done with CFX Studios, guys. Thanks for watching the video. Stay tuned for the next specs on the EOS-R5. I got a whole bunch of other videos coming out for you, but just stay tuned for the next video and be safe in this pandemic.